I knew something was off when my name tag at the launch party said guest. Not lead systems architect, not director of infrastructure, just guest, printed in Comic Sans like a passive-aggressive slap. I'd built the damn backbone of this product. 15 years of 12-hour days, duct taping code together with caffeine and brute force while the execs played musical chairs with job titles. And now I'm standing next to the dry shrimp cocktail, holding a plastic flute of warm champagne, watching this circus unfold like a funeral with mood lighting. The ballroom was rented out for the occasion. Velvet ropes, spotlights, some washed-up DJ from the early 2000s spinning tracks nobody under 40 recognized. Investors milling around in rented confidence, phones out, live streaming the moment our flagship product, the future of integrated logistics, whatever the hell that means today, supposed to change the world. And then came Greg, VP of Product. Hair too perfect, smile too white, always smelled like bark-scented cologne and vague threats. Greg took the stage like he thought he was hosting the Oscars. Big grin, mic in hand, doing the whole "we couldn't have done it without all of you" dance. I clapped out of instinct or muscle memory or sheer social pressure. And then he turned. I also want to share one more update. Exciting shift as we streamline operations. We've made the strategic decision to part ways with a longtime team member. Let's give a round of applause to Claire Matthews for her many years of service. He fired me on stage into a microphone like it was a toast. The clapping started, scattered awkward, like nobody knew what to do, a few gasps, some confused murmurs. I think I heard someone whisper, "Wait, what?" near the mimosa bar. I just stood there, didn't cry, didn't run, just smiled like someone watching their house burn down while sipping sweet tea. I caught Greg's eye, he looked away. My palms were slick with sweat, not because I was surprised, no, I'd smelled this coming weeks ago. Missed meetings, cold shoulders, someone forgetting to invite me to the pre-launch briefings. My badge access had been glitchy for 2 days straight, but still, publicly, at the party, in front of the people I trained, it wasn't just a firing. It was a message: you're obsolete and we can afford to lose you. I excused myself quietly, didn't even finish the champagne. Slid the flute onto a tray some intern was awkwardly carrying like a butler in a fever dream. Walked past the fake Step and Repeat banner with the company logo. Past the stupid Vision 2030 slide looping on the massive screen. Past Greg's LinkedIn photographer, who didn't even pause to notice the ghost walking through the glitter. I drove home in silence. Radio off, phone buzzing with "Are you okay?" Messages from coworkers too scared to speak up in person. The rage hit me in waves, not hot and loud, but quiet, glacial. The kind of rage that settles behind your ribs like concrete. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. See, what Greg didn't know, what none of them had thought to remember, was a little thing buried in the company's legal archives. During the last restructuring phase, legal had asked me to do something unusual. The patent filing system was backlogged, and we were rushing a feature set to meet compliance deadlines. So they had me register the provisional patents and the entire back-end infrastructure under my name as a temporary IP custodian. A legal placeholder, they said, just for a few weeks, until the official filing team caught up. That was 3.5 years ago. Nobody ever followed up. Nobody transferred them back. I searched my inbox that night. The email chain was still there, dates, timestamps, signatures, legal, CTO, me, subject line, temporary IP filing custodianship urgent request. I opened the attached PDF. My name, clear as day, listed as the sole filer and owner of every patent, every system schema, every core logic design we'd built for the last 4 years. It had just sat there, dormant, while I quietly kept the company from collapsing under the weight of its own ego. And now they'd booted me to save 200 grand. I closed the laptop slowly. Not like a slam, but like sealing a tomb. The worst part? I hadn't even meant to do it. It wasn't some power play, some secret ace up my sleeve. It was just sloppy paperwork and corporate short-term thinking. They thought they could gut the engine and still drive the car. I had no idea I was the engine. I turned my phone face down, let the messages pile up. Greg could have his party. He could preen for the investors, spin it as trimming the fat, but I knew the truth, and soon, very soon, so would he. By the time I got home that night, HR had already emailed me the offboarding packet like I was some intern whose summer internship got cut short. Subject line, next steps for transition. No thank you, no call. No explanation beyond the corporate default setting of budget realignment in service of strategic efficiency. I could practically smell the burnt toast of the PR team's brain trying to spin this in real time. Next morning, I woke up to find my company laptop deactivated and my badge revoked. Couldn't even enter the building to pack up the plant I'd kept alive for 6 years. One of those sad-looking pothos vines I used to joke was the only green thing in our department. When I pinged facilities about retrieving my stuff, they told me they'd box it up and ship it. I asked them to make sure they didn't fold the framed photo of my dad. No reply. Just silence, the kind companies confuse with professionalism. Coworkers started dropping off like flies with guilt. No eye contact if they passed me in the hallway when I came by later that week to sign a physical form. The brave ones slid into my DMs with the usual, I'm so sorry, Claire. This is bullshit. I didn't know they were gonna do it like that. One even said, I thought it was a joke until I saw your Slack icon go gray. Yeah, real heartwarming. But Greg was having a moment. By noon the day after the launch party, he'd already updated his LinkedIn. New headshot, teeth bright enough to signal planes, captioned with a status that read, proud to lead a leaner, sharper team into the next evolution of tech innovation. Sometimes tough decisions pave the way for greatness. 200 likes. A dozen comments from other middle management gargoyles clapping like seals. Tough calls make strong leaders. Trimming the fat is never easy, but always necessary. Fat, huh? That's what 15 years of holding the back end together gets you. One line in a VP's self-congratulatory eulogy to his own career climb. I screenshotted it, not because I needed proof, but because I knew there'd come a day when he'd delete it, and I wanted to remember the exact moment he danced on what he thought was my grave. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the system started coughing. I still had access to a few of the admin tools on my personal device. Old integrations I'd helped build before the company started forcing two-factor everything through proprietary devices. Not to sabotage, not to spy, just to watch. I'd written those systems. I knew how they'd breathe when the servers were humming, and how they'd wheeze when someone without proper clearance tried to jerry-rig a deployment. I watched the first deployment post-launch stall out within 12 hours. Logs showed dead calls, unresolved DNS entries, missing API chain that no one had thought to document because, surprise, I was the one who designed it and managed the repo. All those years, they treated documentation like a chore, not a necessity. I tried. God knows I tried to get them to implement a proper version control protocol with detailed ownership records. But that kind of work never made it into sprint meetings. Greg called it invisible labor. Guess what happens when you fire the person doing the invisible labor? The cracks were already forming. The product roadmap was built on sand and the tide had just rolled in. I spent the next few days in my home office, lit by that sad little IKEA desk lamp and a growing stack of receipts, emails, call logs, timestamps, my original custodianship forms. All carefully labeled, backed up, and printed out for safekeeping. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet, but I was building my lifeboat piece by piece. You don't scream when the ship hits the iceberg. You find the exit, you take the oar, and you wait for the captain to realize the boat's sinking because he fired the only one who knew how to steer. By day 6, I could smell the desperation through my inbox. The messages started subtle. A product manager I barely knew pinged me on my personal Gmail. Very casual, very breezy. Hey Claire, hope you're doing well. Quick question, do you remember where we stored the legacy sync script for the inventory API? The one tied to the export functions from the old schema? Can't seem to find it lol. Lol, I didn't respond. Next came a Slack message from Mark in engineering. Mark, who hadn't looked me in the eye since the party, now pretending like we were old war buddies. Hey, weird queue. Do you remember if the image processing queue had a separate cron job or if it was bundled in the deployment pipeline? Asking for traceability. Asking for traceability. That's code for we're screwed and nobody knows why. What they were realizing slowly then all at once was that the glue was gone, that I had been the glue, and nobody bothered to write down what I held in my head. See, I didn't hoard information. I really tried to train people, to hand off pieces, to set up redundancies. But I was always met with the same thing. You're the best at this, Claire. Can you just take care of it? I was the net, the failsafe, the one who made sure the system didn't detonate every Friday at 4:58 p.m. So when they cut me loose and assumed the machine would keep running, that was arrogance. That was Greg. He doubled down at the weekly sync. My old team told me. Screenshots floated into my inbox from allies who hadn't jumped ship yet. Greg told them, there's no cause for panic. We're just cleaning up some documentation debt. Claire's stuff was valuable but not irreplaceable. Let's stay focused. We'll fix it in post. Fix it in post. Like the entire backend of a live logistics platform could be slapped together like a TikTok dance montage. The man had no idea what he was even launching. Just buzzwords and blind optimism, taped together with someone else's code, and that someone else no longer worked there. Meanwhile, chaos blossomed like mold under a leaky sink. Deployments froze mid-process because dependency trees were incomplete. UI elements started throwing 500s due to null returns from the routing engine. Partner API started rejecting payloads outright because no one knew how to re-authenticate after the last token expired. Why? Because the refresh protocol was handled by a microservice that only I ever touched, and it lived on a private repo under my access tree, which had, of course, been revoked. I wasn't sabotaging. That's what Greg would probably claim later. But I hadn't touched a line of code since the night I got fired. Everything they were choking on was their own negligence. A system built on assumptions, shortcuts, and the belief that Claire will always be here. Well, Claire wasn't, and what made it even sweeter, I was no longer angry. Not really. Not like I was in the first 48 hours when I wanted to storm into the server room and rip out a cable just for fun. That phase was gone, burned out. Now I just watched, waited, let the silence speak. There was a moment. Around day 7, when someone on the product team finally had the genius idea to search the internal wiki for the system diagram I'd made back in 2021. The only one that mapped the interdependencies between the 6 main services and the sandbox environments. They found a broken image link and a one-line note that said, "See Claire for access." I never saw that wiki entry before because Greg had insisted on wiping redundant documentation to keep things agile. Yeah, agile my ass. That night, I opened a new document on my home computer. Titled it simply, License Terms Draft 1. I didn't hit save with anger in my fingertips. I did it with the calm detachment of someone filing an insurance claim on a house they knew was going to catch fire, because the idiots inside had already lit the match. Monday morning, 9:03 a.m., the first major delivery checkpoint slipped quietly like a bone fracture under skin. No announcement, no Slack alert, just a cold status update on the dev pipeline. Build failed, access restricted. Owner override required. At first, they thought it was a permissions glitch. Happens all the time, right? Some expired token, someone fat-fingered a directory path, usual Monday mayhem. But then it happened again, and again. Every attempt to push a production-ready build was met with the same polite, robotic slap, access restricted. Owner override required. The problem wasn't the code. The problem was ownership. They checked the Git repo logs, the permissions tree, the CI/CD toolchain, the credentials. None of them worked, not even root admin clearance from IT. The access wasn't missing. It was locked, and not just locked, tied to a single biometric key that no one could trace. That's when the panic started to hum through the building like static. Someone on the infrastructure team finally asked out loud, "Wait, who's listed as the primary owner on the core pipeline?" Silence, clicks, keyboard taps, and then, "This can't be right." Because the system didn't say Company Inc., it didn't say Greg, it didn't even say legal, it said Claire Matthews, my name, plain as day, not buried in some obscure corner of the file system, but stamped on the root-level access layer of the very product they'd fired me over. The one they were supposed to launch globally by Friday. That name triggered a memory in one of the junior engineers, a quiet kid, smart, who probably still eats spaghetti OS straight out of the can. He piped up. Didn't Claire mention something like, years ago, about IP filing stuff? I remember a meeting where she said something like, "I'm technically the owner for now." I thought she was joking. Greg wasn't in that meeting. He never came to anything that didn't involve cameras or coffee carts. So Greg, being Greg, waved it off. She was bluffing. Probably filed something for prototype. Doesn't matter, it's company property. Just fix the pipeline. But someone in legal must have felt a twitch behind their eyeball. Because 45 minutes later, legal pinged engineering. Quietly, no drama. Just a one-line request. Can you forward any documentation referencing Claire Matthews and IP custodianship? Within the hour, they had pulled up the archived thread. The old chain from 3.5 years ago. The one where the legal team, under pressure to meet filing deadlines, had explicitly asked me to temporarily hold patent and system ownership in my name until the proper corporate transfers were processed. A clerical formality, they called it, except the transfer never happened. Nobody followed up. And I never brought it up because I assumed they did. Oops, worse still, the revocation clause. I'd reviewed it that weekend like a bedtime story, sipping whiskey with my feet up. It said quite clearly that the ownership transfer must be executed with explicit written consent from the current owner, and that owner was me. No silent defaults. No automatic reassignment. No fine print loophole. Legal stared at it like they'd found a bomb in a filing cabinet. Greg, meanwhile, was still strutting around telling people to stay focused and escalate to DevOps if needed. I imagine him that afternoon, sipping his turmeric latte, completely unaware that he had just kicked the last support beam out from under his career. I wasn't in the building, but I could smell the sweat from my couch. See, systems remember. Servers don't care about office politics. Machine didn't recognize the org chart, or the LinkedIn titles, or who fired whom. It just knew one thing, the person who built it was no longer inside the building, and it didn't trust anyone else. The email arrived on a Wednesday at exactly 11:47 a.m. Polite, surgical, and full of legally cautious fluff. Dear Miss Matthews, we hope you're well. Reaching out with a few minor questions regarding past filing logistics associated with the current product pipeline. Nothing urgent, just seeking clarification on a few historical procedural items. Let us know if you're open to a brief conversation. Warm regards, Elizabeth Chen, Corporate Counsel. Translation, we stepped on a rake. Please help us without realizing how bad it is. 2 hours later, I get another message. This one less polished. From Greg, subject line, hey, body, hey Claire, crazy week, huh? Hope you're good. I think legal's trying to loop you into some convo about old docs. Just wanted to say no hard feelings on my end. Want to grab coffee and talk through stuff informally first? No pressure. Just thought it'd be nice to clear the air. Clear the air. This man fired me through a sound system over sparkling wine and Spotify remixes. Now he wants to chat. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry anymore, but because I'd already moved past him. Greg wasn't the enemy. Greg was the obstacle that had already tripped and was still trying to act like he'd meant to fall. Instead, I wrote back to legal with a calm, professional reply, happy to connect. I'm available Thursday morning or Friday mid-afternoon. Let me know what works. They booked me for Thursday, 9:30 a.m., conference room 6B. I took my time getting ready. No panic. No shaky hands. Just a clean black blazer, soft gray blouse, matte lipstick, and the same heels I wore when I first presented the foundational architecture of the product they now couldn't launch. A silent callback to when I still believed loyalty bought security. No lawyer, didn't need one. I wasn't being accused of anything. They were just hoping I'd volunteer to unchain their sinking ship before the board noticed the water line creeping up the windows. When I walked into the lobby, reception gave me a weird look, part confusion, part fear, like they'd seen a ghost that remembered their Wi-Fi password. I signed in without saying a word. Legal met me at the elevator, two of them. One junior associate holding a tablet like a shield, and Elizabeth Chen, sharp suit, polite smile, eyes tired in that I've been reading bad news for 6 days straight kind of way. She gestured to the conference room. Thanks for making the time, Claire. I smiled and said, of course, calm. Even, Greg wasn't there yet. They offered me water. I declined. Opened my notebook, blank pages. I didn't bring documents. I didn't need to. At 9:42, the door opened. Greg breezed in like he wasn't 10 minutes late. Dressed business casual, tie-less, fake relaxed. Eyes darted when he saw me. That perfect VP smirk tried to lift until he noticed I wasn't smiling back. He mumbled a half-hearted, "Hey, Claire." I nodded once. Nothing more. Elizabeth cleared her throat. We just wanted to walk through some legacy paperwork, particularly around the provisional IP filings from late 2020 through Q2 of 2021. There appear to be some inconsistencies in the record regarding ownership designations and asset transfers. Inconsistencies, like they discovered termites in the wood after bulldozing the architect. I folded my hands, happy to help clarify anything I can. Greg tried to jump in. I think this is just one of those old record-keeping bugs. We had a lot of backlog back then, remember? Things slipped through. Elizabeth cut him off politely but firmly. Actually, this appears to have been a formally acknowledged custodianship, executed at the request of corporate counsel. She pulled a folder from her briefcase, thick, labeled, my signature visible through the transparent sleeve. Greg squinted. What's that? Elizabeth laid it flat on the table. This is the original IP assignment agreement from March 2021. It names Claire Matthews as the sole filing custodian for all provisional patents, source code submissions, and system architecture documentation filed under Project Kestrel. Greg blinked. Wait, that can't be right. That was a temporary measure. Elizabeth tapped the page. Per the revocation clause on page 6, the transfer of ownership requires a formal signed reassignment. We can't find one. Greg looked at me, suddenly paler. This is a joke, right? I said nothing. Because no, Greg, it wasn't. And this time the mic was all mine. The room was quiet, so quiet, I could hear the HVAC groaning in the ceiling, the low buzz of fluorescent lights doing their slow decay into corporate migraine hell. A half-full carafe of coffee sat untouched near the wall, steaming into oblivion. Legal was already there when I arrived. Elizabeth Chen, her expression drawn tight like a bedsheet over a body, and the junior associate, eyes flicking between tabs on his tablet like a human paper shredder. I sat across from them and placed my notebook on the table. Still blank, still didn't need it. The chair to my right sat empty, Greg's spot. Typical. He was never on time for anything that didn't involve a ribbon cutting or a photographer. 10 minutes passed. Elizabeth kept checking the wall clock like she was doing the math on whether to start without him. I just waited. And then the door cracked open. Greg strutted in like a man still pretending he had control. No laptop, no notepad. Just that stupid "I've got this under control" swagger he probably practiced in his bathroom mirror. Shirt untucked beneath a blazer. No tie, tan loafers that looked like they'd been selected by someone who thought irony was a personality. He smiled wide, like we were old college buddies catching up over brunch. "Sorry I'm late," he said, then dropped into the chair beside me. He gave a soft chuckle. "Hope we're not making this a bigger deal than it needs to be." Nobody laughed. Elizabeth didn't look up. She just pulled the manila folder from her briefcase like it was a loaded weapon. "I'd like to begin by reviewing some documentation related to the product IP and custodianship." She slid the folder toward him. Her voice was neutral, professional, but clipped. "This is the original assignment agreement you signed off on in 2021, delegating full filing rights to Claire Matthews under the Accelerated IP Intake Program." Greg furrowed his brow, leaned forward, and flipped it open like he was expecting a napkin doodle, not a contract that would crater his job. He scanned the front page, then the second. His eyes slowed by page 3. Page 4 stopped them completely. And here, Elizabeth continued, tapping a paper with her pen, "is the revocation clause. I already knew it by heart. No transfer of custodianship or ownership shall be valid unless executed in writing and signed by the current legal custodian." Greg blinked like a man trying to decode a foreign language at gunpoint. Okay, but that was just a stopgap. Temporary. Legal was supposed to transfer everything back once the filings cleared. Elizabeth's face didn't move. "There's no signed transfer in our system. We've confirmed with the compliance archive. Nothing was executed. He turned to me like I'd materialized out of vapor, like he'd just realized I wasn't a ghost haunting the room, I was the one who built the room. Claire, this is a joke, right? I looked at him, really looked at him. The spray tan, the half-buttoned collar. Man who stood under a spotlight and used a wireless mic to kick me out of the company I'd carried on my back for over a decade. I didn't blink, I didn't smirk. I didn't say a goddamn word, because there was nothing left to say. The walls were already closing in, and all Greg had in his hands was a manila folder and a sinking feeling he couldn't polish into spin. He looked back down at the papers again, as if some hidden clause might magically bail him out. Elizabeth spoke softly this time, almost kindly. Without Claire's consent, the company is in breach. The systems can't be legally deployed under current IP law without either an executed transfer or a licensed agreement. Greg opened his mouth, closed it again, swallowed hard. The smirk was gone. I folded my hands. He'd fired me to save 200 grand. Now he was realizing what it was going to cost to fix it. Elizabeth laid it out like a eulogy. No spin, no sugar. Just quiet, lethal facts. The kind that don't sound dramatic until you realize your entire company is dangling over a pit by a paperclip, and the person holding it just walked back into the room with perfect posture and nowhere else to be. The patents, she said, tapping the folder with her pen like a ticking clock, were filed under Miss Matthews' name. So was the code base and the system architecture, all submitted through our accelerated custodianship filing initiative in early 2021. There's no record of a signed transfer. No IP reassignment. That makes Claire, she paused, glancing at me, the legal owner of the operational stack. Greg blinked hard, but the product is built on that code. The whole thing. You're saying the launch would be an act of infringement, Elizabeth cut in, still calm. Yes, silence. Not dramatic movie score silence. Real silence. The kind that makes your ears ring because your brain's screaming in the vacuum. Greg leaned back in his chair like he'd just been told the brakes failed mid-freefall. I thought this was cleaned up. I thought it was a formality, he said, more to himself than to us. We built on top of it. It's all integrated. We've had 5 release cycles, none of which invalidate the ownership, Elizabeth said, unless Claire voluntarily signed it over, which she did not. Greg looked at me now, really looked. His face had gone from corporate tan to corpse gray. And we can't launch? He asked, breath shallow. Elizabeth inhaled carefully, not without securing a retroactive licensing agreement. He slumped forward, elbows on the table, staring at the papers like they might start speaking in tongues. But the investor demo's scheduled for Friday. They're expecting a full walkthrough. If we cancel again, the implication hung in the air like static before a storm. Elizabeth didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just folded her hands and looked at me. That's when it clicked for Greg what this meeting was actually about. It wasn't a courtesy. It wasn't a clarification. This was a goddamn negotiation. Only he wasn't holding any of the cards. His eyes flicked to mine, desperate now, voice cracking under the weight of the truth. Can she just fix it? I held his gaze. I didn't blink, didn't twitch. I wanted him to feel the full gravity of the question leaving his mouth. Because a week ago, Greg had a microphone in his hand and my name in his teeth. Now he was watching his entire career swirl toward the drain, and I was the only hand near the lever. I waited a beat. Then, slowly, with zero inflection, I said the only words I would utter in that room. That depends. It hit him like a dropped elevator. His shoulders sagged, fingers trembling just slightly as he reached for the glass of water in front of him and missed it by an inch. Reality wasn't setting in. It had already settled. Now it was just watching him drown. Elizabeth cleared her throat. We'll need to discuss potential licensing terms. Claire, we can send over a draft proposal by end of day. I nodded once, nothing more. Greg didn't say another word. For the first time in his life, he understood what non-negotiable really meant. The first offer came by email. Subject line, excited to collaborate again? Cute. It read like a high school apology letter rewritten by a PR firm. They offered me my old job back, same title, same pay, plus back pay from the date of termination. Tossed in a $15K re-engagement bonus, like I was a freelance wedding singer they ghosted and suddenly needed again. I didn't even open the attachment, just replied, no, thank you. Let me know if you'd like to explore licensing options. 12 hours later, the second offer arrived, this one more nervous. A 6-month consulting contract at $200/hour. Flexible terms. The phrasing danced around the truth like it was radioactive. They wanted my access. My name, my blessing. They just didn't want to admit they had no leverage. I read it over coffee in my kitchen while my cat knocked over a spoon and made more impact than their entire legal team. I emailed back my counter, exclusive non-transferable license, limited to 5 years. No derivative work without my approval. 7 figures paid upfront, retainer optional. Access contingent on my signature, nothing activates until wire confirmation. No backdoors, no transition help, no bullshit. Sent it. No pleasantries. No emoticons. By week's end, the panic had gone public. A whisper of technical delays started spreading across the investor channels. The press release announcing our launch had been quietly pulled from the homepage. I checked the stock tracker out of morbid curiosity. They weren't in freefall, but they weren't floating either. The graph dipped just enough to spook the board. When you're propped up by promises and seed rounds, momentum is currency. Greg had just lit theirs on fire. Then came the whispers. One former coworker texted me, hearing Greg's off the project. They pulled his access to the investor deck. Another message, someone said he's on sabbatical. Nobody's seen him since Wednesday. By Friday, someone forwarded me the internal memo. No fanfare. Just a dry paragraph buried between an HR webinar and a reminder to reset passwords, effective immediately. VP of Product Greg Havorson will be transitioning out of his role. Interim oversight will be provided by the Chief Technology Officer. No thank you, no tribute, no we appreciate his service. Just a footnote in a newsletter no one reads. I didn't gloat, I didn't send a message, I didn't even save the memo. It wasn't about revenge, not anymore. That part of me burned out the moment I saw him ask, can she just fix it? Like I was a janitor holding a mop, not the architect holding the deed. Now it was just paperwork, quiet surgical justice. A signature in my inbox instead of a scream in the parking lot. When legal finally called to accept my terms, Elizabeth sounded exhausted, like someone who'd spent a week trying to staple smoke to a wall. We're ready to move forward on your proposal, Claire. I'll send the final licensing draft shortly. I said, great, I'll review it this weekend. She paused. You're not in a hurry? No, I said, watching the sun hit my coffee just right. I'm not the one who needs this to ship. She didn't reply, didn't have to. Sometimes closure doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence and the knowledge that someone's entire ladder was built on your name, and you just took the bottom rung with you. The conference room was colder than I remembered. Same skyline view, same overpriced coffee, same long mahogany table polished to a soulless sheen. But this time, the nameplate in front of me didn't say Director of Systems. It said Claire Matthews, Principal Halcyon Code Advisory. The title wasn't flashy, didn't need to be. I wasn't here as an employee. I was here as a vendor, with the kind of leverage you only get once if you're lucky, and you hold it with both hands. Elizabeth from legal did the honors. She opened the meeting with the standard legalese, but her voice carried a new weight, like she wanted to make damn sure no one missed the part where I was now the sole license holder of the core intellectual property stack underlying the company's logistics platform. Greg's old seat was empty. Rumor had it he was transitioning to opportunities outside the company. Translation: shoved out a side door and told to smile for the farewell Slack message. A man who once fired me through a Bluetooth microphone at a catered launch party hadn't even been invited to the meeting that would decide the future of the very product he'd claimed credit for. I clicked the remote. Slide deck illuminated behind me. Let's begin, I said. The first slide was titled, Platform Roadmap Revised Deployment Timeline, my logo in the corner, my terms in the footer. I walked them through the adjusted launch phases, highlighting new access protocols, phased licensing checkpoints, and quarterly audits I would personally oversee. My terms, my rules. The CTO nodded grimly. The head of partnerships asked a few cautious questions, which I answered with smooth, rehearsed confidence. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to dictate. One of the older board members, a guy whose name I never learned because he only showed up for IPO conversations, raised his glass of Pellegrino toward me midway through the Q&A. To keeping the smart ones happy next time, he said, with a smirk that tasted like too late wisdom. A few chuckles echoed around the table, nervous mostly. No one wanted to be next in the crosshairs of their own oversight. The meeting wrapped fast after that. Once the vote to ratify the licensing agreement passed, unanimously, most of them filtered out with their heads down, murmuring thanks again. Claire, like I was the surgeon who saved the patient they forgot was bleeding. As I packed up my laptop, the CTO, who used to sit 2 floors above me and couldn't remember my name at company parties, paused beside me. You really built all that yourself? He asked, gesturing vaguely toward the projection. I met his eyes. No, I built it for them. Then they built a noose with it. He flinched slightly, nodded once, and left. I took my time walking out. No need to rush. No one would dare tell me I didn't belong in that room now. At the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass, taller somehow, or maybe just unburdened. Behind me, the boardroom door clicked shut like a book finally closed. And in the silence of the ride down, I heard it again in my own voice, quiet, certain, absolute. I cost $200K to fire. 7 figures to forget it. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit him.